In 1987, Delta Airlines paid $860 million for an airline most Americans had already forgotten about. Western Airlines was the oldest continuously operating carrier in the United States. 61 years of history, routes across the entire American West, and a hub in a city that nobody outside of Utah considered strategically important. Delta's Atlanta executives flew in, signed the papers, and inherited something they hadn't fully planned for: Salt Lake City International Airport. For the next 3 decades, that hub sat quietly in Delta's network, useful, profitable, but invisible. The kind of asset that generates steady returns without ever making headlines. Then something changed, and the numbers coming out of Salt Lake City in the last 5 years reveal a strategy so deliberate, so systematic, that it's impossible to call it accidental. Delta isn't managing a regional hub in the desert, it's building a second Atlanta. And by the time most people notice, it will already be done. Salt Lake City is not an obvious place to build one of the most powerful airline hubs in the United States. The metro population is just over 1.2 million, smaller than Memphis, smaller than a dozen American cities that don't have major hubs at all. Utah is landlocked, surrounded by mountains, economically concentrated in technology and tourism, rather than the heavy industry or financial services that traditionally generate high-yield business travel. And yet, Salt Lake City International Airport handles 343 scheduled nonstop departures per day to 93 cities across North America, South America, Asia, and Europe. It consistently ranks among the top airports in the United States for on-time performance, and it is the most expensive major airport in the Mountain West to fly out of. The average airfare at Salt Lake City was $450 in the second quarter of 2025, about $65 above the national average. Salt Lake City ranked the 4th most expensive airport in the entire country based on 2024 data. That premium doesn't exist despite Delta's dominance. It exists because of it, and understanding why requires going back to a merger that most people in aviation have stopped thinking about. Today, we're going to understand how an $860 million acquisition in 1987 became one of the most strategically valuable assets in American aviation, and why Delta is spending right now to transform a regional hub into something much larger. And we're going to understand what the passengers paying $597 to fly to Las Vegas are actually financing. Here's how the model really works. Western Airlines began flying mail from Salt Lake City to Los Angeles on April 17, 1926. The first private company awarded a U.S. mail contract on that route. When Delta absorbed it 61 years later, it inherited not just planes and gates, it inherited 6 decades of route relationships, passenger loyalty, and most importantly, a geographic position that no amount of money could replicate from scratch. Salt Lake City sits at a geometric sweet spot in the American West that has no equivalent. It is the only major hub between Denver and the Pacific Coast, a gap of roughly 800 miles, and the only hub in the Intermountain West connecting the Rocky Mountain region to both coasts simultaneously. Take that hub out of Delta's network, and the entire Mountain West corridor collapses overnight. The real mechanism is what Delta calls the banked schedule. Dozens of flights arriving within a narrow window, passengers connecting across gates, a new wave of departures launching within the hour. It works at scale only when one carrier controls enough of the airport to synchronize the waves. At Salt Lake City, Delta controls 69% of all capacity. No competitor can replicate the schedule. The hub becomes self-reinforcing, and the passengers become, in the bluntest terms available, captive. And then there's the piece that reveals how permanent Delta intends this to be. In 2023, Delta signed the lease extension keeping it in Salt Lake City until at least 2044, with an option for another 10 years. The airport's own executive director said publicly he wasn't aware of any airport airline lease agreement as long as this one anywhere in the world. Delta didn't just buy a hub, it locked the door from the inside and swallowed the key. This model has been tested before, and it survived something that should have destroyed it. After the 2008 financial crisis, Delta came closer than it ever publicly admitted to reconsidering Salt Lake City. Internal discussions about consolidating Western operations around Denver surfaced in industry reporting. The argument was straightforward. Why maintain an expensive hub in a small market when a larger one was available 500 miles east? The answer came from the data. Every small Mountain West city, Bozeman, Idaho Falls, St. Valley, St. George, that fed passengers into Salt Lake City would lose its primary connection to the national network. Those passengers don't disappear. They drive to Denver or fly southwest to Phoenix, and they don't come back. The hub's value wasn't in Salt Lake City itself, it was in the 40 smaller cities that only had access to the world because Salt Lake City existed as a connection point. Delta kept the hub, and it never seriously discussed closing it again. The scale of what Delta is building right now in Salt Lake City has no precedent outside of Atlanta. In September 2020, Delta opened a 900,000 square foot Concourse A. In 2023, 9 additional gates opened, followed by 22 more in October, bringing Delta's total to 50. That same year, Delta signed a new lease increasing its gate count from 55 to 66, with completion expected in 2027. In June 2023, Delta broke ground on a pilot training facility next to the airport, its first significant training investment outside of Atlanta headquarters in 55 years. The facility has capacity for 10 flight simulators. Delta now trains its Western pilots in Salt Lake City. It doesn't send them to Atlanta anymore. In November 2025, Delta announced an $18 million cargo facility, 48,000 square feet built inside a former U.S. Postal Service building, opening in 2027. And then the international routes, the detail that changes the entire frame. In June 2025, Delta launched its first ever nonstop from Salt Lake City to Seoul. In December 2025, Salt Lake City to Lima, Peru, the first nonstop connection between Utah and South America. Seoul, Lima, from Salt Lake City. Those are not regional hub routes. Those are the routes of an airline that has decided this airport is a global gateway. While Delta was building, its competitors were doing the math and walking away. Denver actually approached Delta after the merger and offered incentives to relocate the hub there. Delta declined. United took Denver. Delta kept Salt Lake City. The two carriers divided the American interior between them without a single gate war. Southwest and Frontier operate at Salt Lake City, but at a fraction of Delta's scale. A round trip to Las Vegas on Southwest runs between $95 and $268. The same trip on Delta runs between $597 and $1,007. Those prices coexist in the same airport because Delta's passengers aren't choosing on price. They're connecting through a network that Southwest and Frontier simply don't have. The hub premium isn't a failure of competition. It's proof that the network itself have become the product. Delta has called Salt Lake City the Atlanta of the West, and for once, the marketing language is accurate. Atlanta took 50 years to become what it is, a hub so dominant that no competitor has made a serious attempt to challenge there in over 2 decades. Salt Lake City is on a faster timeline. The lease runs to 2054. The training facility is open. The cargo hub opens in 2027. The international routes are live. In Q1 2026 alone, Delta operated 21,242 flights from Salt Lake City, 2.79 million seats, ranking it 4th among all Delta hubs by volume. The passengers paying $65 above the national average aren't victims of a pricing strategy. They're financing the construction of something that will be impossible to undo by the time anyone decides to challenge it. Delta paid $860 million for Western Airlines in 1987. It inherited a hub nobody wanted in a city nobody was watching, and it spent the next 4 decades turning that inheritance into one of the most structurally dominant positions in American aviation. The race isn't over, but in Salt Lake City, Delta isn't racing anyone. It's building walls. If you want to understand the real money moving American aviation, subscribe for more analysis. Until next time.